Okay, we are live. Sweet. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our second ever Stripe Dev Chat. This is an hour-long session where we're going to really focus on Stripe Terminal. Really excited to show you Stripe Terminal. And then also, we're just going to focus the last half of this hour on your questions. Really excited about the team here, right? So we are actually showing you Stripe Terminal, and the team I have today is literally all the different groups that helped build Stripe Terminal. So we have docs engineers, we have product managers, we have a lot of our own Stripe engineers lurking in the video. So thanks everyone for watching, and please ask questions in the comments. And I don't know where the button is, but please subscribe to this Stripe developers channel. We would love to have you join us for, we have office hours and some other stuff coming. Some quick plugs before we dive in. So one, big thanks to the Stripe Partner Program. So if you're a company or a business that's interested in kind of having insider info and also our Works With gallery, we definitely encourage you to go to stripe.com/partner-program. And that is definitely a resource worth your time. And also one plug is, if you're interested in like what's changing in the API, what are new products and tooling for developers, please subscribe to our Developer Digest. That's like our monthly place where we can show you news and information. Just go to stripe.dev and scroll to the bottom and add your email, and you'll find out about like upcoming events like this live stream for you. And so I think I'll stop talking now. And what I want to do is we'll kind of have the terminal team introduce themselves, Lucy, Ben, and Roshan. And then Roshan, after those intros, why don't you just take it away, and then we'll do Q&A after we show you the docs. So Lucy, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks. I'm Lucy. I am the tech writer on Terminal. So I'll talk a little bit about the docs and where to start and how to use them.
I'm Ben. I'm an engineering manager on Terminal, and I can answer questions about our SDKs and the rest of our kind of engineering product.
And I'm Roshan. I'm one of the product managers on Terminal. So to go ahead and dive right in, what we wanted to start off with was just kind of an overview of what Terminal is and kind of some of the problems it can help you solve. We'll then flip over a little bit to talking about how Terminal works with the rest of the Stripe stack, and kind of some of the design decisions we made to really hone in on Terminal with Billing and Terminal with Connect. Finally, we'll flip over to a demo. Want to kind of show you the things you could build with Terminal. We have an example point of sale application, in addition to walking you through how to use our open source JavaScript application, which is available for you to just go grab and download and play with today. As Chris mentioned, we'll plan to leave quite a bit of time at the end for Q&A, so make sure you drop those questions in. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So at its core, Terminal is a customizable way for you to build a point of sale experience. And the customizable part of that has been really important to us as we've thought about how Stripe can go out and build in-person payments and make that a product available for all of you to integrate with. You bring your own hardware, you bring your own application, and Stripe provides a series of web and mobile SDKs that allow you to interface with the reader hardware that we support. So today we support 2 different readers. You can maybe see an example of those in the table here. We'll give you a closer look in a minute here. But really what we're providing is a set of developer tools for you to take your existing application and hook it into Stripe for in-person payments, or build a brand new application and kind of do that from the beginning. Along the way, and as we were thinking about building the product, we actually noticed that there's a couple of sort of traditional pain points when it comes to in-person payments. And so to quickly go through these, we see everything from months of certification time as far as compliance and requirements from card networks in order to accept those payments. We see difficulty with integrating online and offline payment systems, things like having consistent transaction logs and a unified view of that customer. We've seen experiences where in-person payments can't be easily configured to match your brand and style and kind of the look and feel of your existing app and business. And of course, there's a slew of compliance and security requirements. And as we built Terminal, we really honed in on each one of these areas to kind of add to the core pillars of the product. And what I want to do is just kind of talk through each of these briefly. So first off, this is a bit of a crazy slide, but suffice it to say, there's a lot that goes into in-person payments. And I'm sure many of you who joined us are pretty familiar with the ins and outs of this. But just to give a quick overview here, there's things like certifications with EMVCo and the card brands There are compliance requirements, things like hardware and software updates, security patches that need to be provisioned to devices, of course, PCI compliance, encryption requirements, and much more. The way we've designed Terminal is to abstract as much of that away from you as we can. So as I mentioned, you build an integration to Terminal, you integrate with our SDKs, and in doing so, you're able to reap the benefits of some of the work that we do on the back end. So in this case, that means that our readers and hardware that we provide are pre-certified and meet all the requirements from a compliance and certification standpoint for in-person payments. Similarly, we provide ways to remote update or even automatically update our reader software such that if new security updates or even application and feature updates are available, we can remotely provision those onto devices, which makes your deployment and management that much easier. Finally, we use state-of-the-art encryption, which helps around the PCI story when it comes to in-person payments, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. The other core part that I wanted to mention here is that Terminal is really built with developers in mind. And this is sort of a part about the product that I personally really love. Today, we support iOS and Android native SDKs in addition to JavaScript SDK for the web. And getting set up with Terminal is really fast. And we've been kind of blown away with how quickly folks have been able to build an MVP integration, get up and running, and start accepting payments. The code snippet you see here on the screen is just an example of how you'd be able to customize the reader display. And so going back to that sort of ability to customize sort of the payment experience and make sure that your customers who are in the store are seeing kind of what you want to see and in line with your brand. Part of that sort of customer experience is also being able to not lose sight of the customer if they choose to purchase something in a store versus through a website or traditional e-commerce platform. And so we've seen some cases where a customer might like a product on your website, but go in store to purchase it. And there's a little bit of a disconnect there, right? In terms of identifying who that customer is, perhaps wanting to look up transaction history. We've seen some interesting sort of thought cases around this in terms of loyalty points and redemption and kind of emails and things like that. And so one of the things that we really thought strongly about was how do we make it easier to unify that view of the customer? And Terminal does that out of the box. So on the back end, it's the same Stripe backend that you might be using today for online payments. And when you go in store, you have access to the same sort of Stripe backend infrastructure through your server-side integration that enables that sort of customer view. So if you have a customer that chooses to visit a store and maybe do some window shopping for a product and happens to convert and buy that product, let's say they go home and decide to have a change of heart and want to return that product, you can initiate that return through your web interface or through tooling that you've built that interacts with Stripe, even though that transaction took place in store. So really just wanting to give a sort of unified way to manage payments. And this is a particularly strong pain point we heard from a lot of folks around making it easier to just have a unified view of the customer. Part of this, as I kind of alluded to, is around sort of being able to measure and look at customer performance. And so again, that same sort of customer objects that you might be using with Stripe today can be used with Terminal as well in kind of keeping those things in sync. So as an example here, we've had one large user that worked with us really closely during the beta and has been able to deploy thousands of readers across hundreds of stores. I didn't talk about this before, but the Stripe dashboard here becomes a core part of the process. We've integrated Terminal into the dashboard with a suite of sort of device management tools, location configuration tools that allow you to go in and basically segment this data into ways that make logical sense for your organization, with, of course, the sort of customizability that comes with the broad set of Stripe products. The other thing I wanted to talk about is around customization a little bit more. So one example we like to talk about here is the example of a yoga studio that might be having a summer sale. Traditionally, it's really complex to be able to customize what faces the customer in store. With our Verifone reader, which I'll show you in just a moment, the studio manager could go in and create a splash screen, a custom screensaver that is shown on the device when it's in an idle state. They can drag and drop that screen into the dashboard, and within 15 minutes, it'll update in the store. And you can just sort of start to think about the possibilities when it comes to creating that customized experience, whether it's a promotional thing such as this, or even just having your brand on the device in the store if you wanted to remove sort of the Stripe feel from the equation. Finally, we talked a little bit about compliance and sort of in-person payments. As Stripe hopefully does pretty well here, we try to abstract this away when it comes to our online products, like if you're using Stripe.js or Stripe Elements or Stripe Checkout. We've taken a similar tack here with Stripe Terminal. There's usually a sort of thorough, complex survey that comes with the requirement to attest validation for in-person payments. We will help you as much as we can here. So we'll provide a pre-filled SAQ document if you'd like to reach out to us for that. We can also provide advice on PCI filing and attestation, depending on what the requirements of your business are. So just like we do with online products, we've taken the same sort of approach with products in person. Cool, so I want to flip over now a little bit to talk about how Terminal works with the rest of the Stripe stack. So as I mentioned, we sort of thought about this from the beginning. We saw a lot of really powerful use cases that I'll walk through around both Connect and billing. And so the first thing is just kind of thinking about how Stripe Connect works with Stripe Terminal. So if you're familiar with Connect, it's our product for platforms to be able to manage a business that sort of allows reselling to individual connected accounts or provisioning individual connected accounts. And it enables a wide variety of funds flows. And Terminal works out of the box with all of these funds flows. We have a really cool page in our docs, which Lucy will show you, around Terminal plus Connect. And this is, I think, where we've seen a lot of really exciting use cases around a platform perhaps being able to provision their accounts with access to Terminal while choosing to control the experience or choosing to let Stripe control some of the experience. And you can kind of see homages to that in terms of the Standard Connect, Custom Connect, and Express Connect offerings that we have at Stripe today. So long story short, if a cardholder pays online or in person through your platform, you have a unified view of that customer through Stripe, and you're able to leverage the funds flows that you're taking advantage of with Stripe today, if that's the case. Another thing that's really cool about this is that it's a unified onboarding process. So oftentimes in the ISO space, it can be pretty complex and burdensome to be able to onboard a customer for in-person payments or onboard a merchant for in-person payments. What we provide with Stripe is that once your connected account has been onboarded through Connect, that account can be used for in-person payments, and it kind of just works. We are able to take advantage of the onboarding process that's built into Connect and make it really easy, just like within a couple of minutes, to get up and running with in-person. Finally, there's a really exciting use case here around billing, and this is actually one of my favorites to talk about. So if you go back to that Yoga Studio example, we might have the Yoga Studio that chooses to perhaps sell monthly memberships. Maybe they're using Stripe Billing to create some subscription options. And they also have an in-store presence, so someone can come in and kind of pay for a single class. With Stripe Billing and Stripe Terminal, you can actually unify those two things. And so we offer the ability for a customer to present their card, and for your platform or you as a business to save the presented card details as a customer object on Stripe. What that enables is basically access to the full set of things you can do with Stripe customers. So that's anything from issuing one-off charges, or in this case, actually, using the card details that were presented in store to create an online subscription, along with the full power of the Stripe billing stack. So really, one way to think about it is that we're providing you with a token for that in-person card, just like Stripe Elements or Stripe.js would do online in terms of providing you a token for the card that you can then use later on for any sorts of payments experiences that you can dream of. Cool. So hopefully that was a quick intro. I wanted to now flip over to a bit of a demo, and a couple of things that we wanted to show you here. I'm going to get set up with my screen so we can everything be visible. Cool. All right. So I wanted to walk you through kind of a few examples of what you can build with Stripe Terminal. And the first example here is an app that we built in-house for some demos. It's a demo for Stripe Press. And if you're not familiar with Press, that's our imprint for a bunch of print materials and really great books that Stripe has been putting out. And we just have kind of a sample point of sale app. This is built using the JavaScript SDK and is an app that lets you drive payments. And so what I'm going to do is just demonstrate what that looks like and what it could look like. One thing to keep in mind here is that this is fully customizable. So the sort of user interface you see here is something you could build or change or architect. And then the reader, which you'll see to the right, you also have some control over. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by pairing the reader. And with the Verifone reader, what we do is we basically request a pairing code, which is a set of dictionary words. And I'm going to label this reader with an emoji because I find that that's a little bit easier. And I'll click Start Pairing. You'll notice that once I click that, the reader updates and says it's ready to go, and I'm ready to process payment. In this point of sale app, we've basically made the UI such that it automatically flips and takes away that sort of occlusion of the items, which kind of indicates to the person operating the point of sale that they're ready to go with payments. So I can start adding some items. You'll notice a couple of example items here for some issues of increment, and that as I add the items to the cart or as I modify the quantity, that the reader display updates. And so those are actually individual calls that are being made to our Stripe JavaScript SDK. There's a set reader display function, which we'll look at in a little more detail in a minute here. And the reader is basically updating with the specifics that you want it to show. It's just sort of some simple JSON that you pass over. When we're ready to pay for the basket here, we can hit charge. And then you'll notice that in this case, our point of sale application's UI updates to say, hey, we're waiting on the customer to present their card details. The reader also updates to prompt the customer really explicitly to swipe, insert, or tap their card. In our case, we have a test card here, and it's a tappable card. So I'll just tap it on the reader, and it'll process and thank me for my payment. So it's really that easy. It's just really, a simple experience to be able to add some items, prompt the customer to pay, and it's that fast. That was a transaction going through Stripe's test mode. We, of course, support all sort of modern card presentment methods. So all of our readers today, the Verifone one here and the VB-POS reader, which we'll give you a closer look at as well, support tap cards, which you just saw me do, so contactless EMV cards, as well as traditional EMV chip inserts and mag stripe for fallback as needed. So if we were to do a new sale here, just to kind of show you that EMV experience, we'll charge $13 to my card. And I'll just insert that card there, remove, and we get a successful test transaction. So really cool stuff. And what's really cool also about this on the back end is that that reader is now associated with my Stripe account. So what I'm going to do next is walk you through a example app that we've built. So this is the Stripe Terminal.js demo app. This is something that we've open sourced. It's available on GitHub. There's a couple of links to it from the docs. And we really recommend it as a way to get started with the JavaScript SDK, as it kind of provides you with some really cool developer-friendly tools and interfaces. This app includes a running version that we can just click out to an app spot and kind of check out and play with. What I'm going to do is walk you through the process of how to clone this locally and get it up and running. In my case, I have an example backend running already. If you're interested in setting that up, you can just click the link here. We have an example backend that's just a Sinatra web app, and you can one-click deploy to Heroku or kind of clone and run this locally depending on what's easier for you, just for demo purposes. But basically, the backend with Terminal handles some of the sort of server-side interactions, like handling the connection token and a few other things. And so there's some more detail on kind of the front-end versus back-end separation of Terminal in our docs. But what I want to do here is just walk through how this would work. So I'm just going to clone this repo, and let me zoom in a bit here so it's a little more visible. And all I need to do to get this up and running is just to install it and start it. Oh, well, looks like. Oh, you need to go into the folder for this to work. There we go. Cool. So this is going to take a few seconds to install and just kind of install the dependencies that are required. And once that's up and running, we'll be able to get a web app up.
Roshan, can I just say this is very awesome to see the live demo.
Glad it is. And so now in this case, I'm running another app on port 3000 since I was running that other demo. So we're going to have it run on a new app. And there is our example. It's going to refresh here, I think, for a minute. Let's give it a second. There we go. OK. And so now we have our example app. So again, this is something you can clone and play with locally. The first thing it does is it prompts you for the backend. So you can provide a local URL if that's something that you're hosting on the machine that you're using for development. In my case, as I mentioned, I have something running on Heroku right now. So we're trying to do Roshan terminal backend.herokuapp.com. And if everything works, we should get a connection. Great. All right, so this provides, again, just sort of a set of interfaces for you to see what Terminal can do. So we can register a reader, which you saw me do previously in the other demo. This is where we generate that pairing code and be able to, see add a label to the reader, so we have a way to kind of refer to it in our UI and things like that. We also offer a reader simulator here, which is really cool. So if you wanted to start building an integration without having any physical hardware, you'd just be able to hit that Use Simulator button and get up and running to see, the calls you could make to a reader. Our simulated reader will respond with responses. And so there's kind of a cool way to kind of get up and running and stub out your integration if you, are deciding if the hardware is right for you. I mentioned earlier that that device that I registered is already associated with my Stripe account. So in this case, I don't need to re-register it. I can just hit this Discover button, and the app here is going to discover readers. And within a moment here, it should come up with the reader, and there we go. You'll see that it found my reader, emoji label, and everything. It shows me the serial number and IP address. And if you look to the right side of the screen here, you'll see that that's really just an interface that's showing the response from Stripe. So when you make that Discover Reader call, you receive a slew of information about the device, the software version, the serial number, even its status, like whether it's online or offline. And what I really like about this app is that it's really developer focused. So you'll notice it's showing every single call that's being made under the hood, whether that's creating a connection token to sort of initialize the reader, to discovering readers, which is actually what just happened. So if I click connect, you're going to see some logs appear on the right side of the screen here as well. So I'm going to click connect. You'll see it first went to a status of connecting right here. We then got a on request status change from the SDK, which we handled, and we're able to call terminal.connect reader. And again, we can see the request and response that was made as part of that. So again, here are UI updates. We've made this app such that the UI changes when a connection event is detected to kind of flip it into let's go get payment mode. That's something you can control. You could choose to have that available just all the time. But again, it's sort of fully customizable to how you want to build your sort of operator-facing interface. And in this case, let's just show an example. So we're going to create an item for let's make it a blue t-shirt. And $51 seems a bit expensive. So we'll go with $12 and go ahead and update the line items and totals. And you'll see here that the reader updates with that information. This is that setReaderDisplay method that I was talking about earlier. So when you call terminal.setReaderDisplay, you're able to pass some JSON that includes line items that you'd like to show on the display, as well as any taxes and totals and a currency option for now. And that's what controls whether, what the customer sees. And again, that's something that you can change as, to your heart's content during the point of sale and checkout process. In this case, when we're ready to collect payment, I can hit collect card payment. And you'll notice that we're calling a backend.createPaymentIntent. So if you're familiar with payment intents, it's sort of the new recommended way to create payments with Stripe. We talk a lot about that in our docs and are happy to point you to some specifics as well. And you'll notice again, the reader updates requesting payment. I'll tap my card. And we then see our collect payment method, process payment, and our payment intent capture, which is how we capture the funds here. What's really cool about this is that these are all sort of dynamic links. So if I wanted to learn more about what capture payment intent does, I can just click on that link and I'm taken to the relevant portion of the docs that helps me understand what's going on under the hood. Or if I run into a bug or something that I wasn't expecting, I can really quickly inspect sort of why that's the case or what might have happened. Similarly, we do a similar sort of linking for the SDK. So if I find an SDK method here like setReaderDisplay, we'll take you directly to the relevant section of the JavaScript SDK docs. So if you need to go back and look for a quick reference, you're able to just quickly jump back and forth between what you saw in your test infrastructure with the test app versus what our docs recommend or suggest that you do in order to get the functionality you want. So that's a quick overview here. The sample app also allows you to test the saving card for future use workflow. So we talked a little bit about that in the Stripe billing use case. This is, we can just demo how this looks. If I just save a card here, we'll go ahead and insert that. And we're prompted to remove it. And if I scroll up here, you'll see that we call terminal.read reusable card, which is the JavaScript SDK function in order to grab the card details. You'll see in this case, we get some great data about the card, things like the card fingerprint, what type of card it is, the last four, the read method, et cetera. And so that's all just sort of data coming from Stripe's API that's returned to your application. This reusable card can then be saved to a customer object, which enables sort of the online payments use cases that we had talked about. One last thing I'll mention here is that all the readers that we have support, all of the sort of modern entry methods. I think I might have talked about this a moment ago, but being able to tap a card, insert EMV cards, and things like contactless EMV, Apple Pay, Google Pay, and all of that. So cool. So next up, we want to talk a little bit about our docs. So I'm going to hand it over to Lucy, and she'll take us through a couple of docs pages that we think really make it easy to get started with your integration.
Cool. Thanks, Roshan. So the main reason we're going to talk about docs is they should be self-service and easy to understand, but Roshan just gave you a crash course on Terminal, a lot of information. If you're anything like me, you might need a place to go and kind of relearn all that, or actually go and do it and know where you can find all of these things. So stripe.com/docs has all of our docs for all of our Stripe products. Terminal is here. We have a big overview page where you can share this with people and tell them why you want to use it. Basically high level information. If you need a refresher or just want to see things in text. And then the example applications that Roshan was talking about, you can go and try yourself on this page. We talk a little about what the architecture of this example app looks like what's actually going on, which might be a little different from your end integration. Yeah, walk you through some steps, kind of send you to all of the links that Roshan was just showing you. I won't spend too much time on that. This page is the only page I would like to spend some time on. Basically, we've divided the docs into a couple of sections here. So everything, these 3 pages at the top are to kind of set you up for success with Terminal. It's a flexible product. There's a lot you can do with it. That shouldn't be overwhelming. So up front, kind of figuring out what you're going for is a good idea, and it'll make your whole process of integrating easier. So this page just kind of walks you through what you should be thinking about up front. So picking a reader type, step 1, that works for the in-person payments experience you want to create. Step 2, choosing an SDK type that's compatible with your chosen reader type and your existing software. And step 3, learning about the high-level architecture for your deployment, just kind of figuring out what you're going to be doing here. So if you are thinking about getting started with Terminal, or you've already kind of started, do spend some time on this doc just to set yourself up for success. Here's a nice comparison of what you're getting with each reader. If you want to talk about either of the readers.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about how there's sort of 2 different form factors here. A couple of considerations that you might think about, things like price, they're priced differently. Also, whether or not you're using sort of iOS, Android, like a mobile platform versus a web-based platform. Today, the mobile platforms support the BB-Pause Bluetooth-enabled reader, and our web platform supports the Verifone reader. So you might make a decision here depending on your tech stack. We do have support for iOS and Android with the P400 Verifone reader coming soon. So that's something that we're hoping to get out when we can. So there'll be a little more optionality from the mobile side there, but just a heads up, that might be, one way to think about it. We've seen users do sort of all sorts of different things, whether it's we really want a branded countertop experience, or we really want a mobile-driven experience because we already have an iOS app, things like that. And so, we suspect this choice will be slightly different for everyone, but we wanted to provide sort of as much info as we could here, to Lucy's point, to make it a little bit easier to choose.
Cool. Then after you've made those 2 choices, you can start to get a feel for what your scope of work will be. So for the BB-Pause integration, it'll look something like this. And for the Verifone integration, it'll look something a little more like this. And then the rest of the docs, hopefully these next steps walk you through so that you never have to get lost. But why can't I scroll on the side here? Okay, cool. So we have a few other sections. Won't go over these. I don't think it'll make a great live talk going through like the getting started with your SDK, but that's where you would go next. And then we have a whole reader section. So basically like everything you would want to know, like reader setup is divided into the 2 readers. This will tell you like how to turn your reader on, like how to use it all, how to troubleshoot, how to update. And then connecting to a reader is more about the integration part. So like how to actually connect your app to the reader for each reader. Fleet management is a bit about like locations and like how to use the dashboard to manage, especially if you're a Connect platform and you have like a bunch of readers and you want to kind of keep track of them and understand where they are. And then transactions is where you would go to actually learn how to start collecting payments, saving cards, like actually doing things once you're set up. And then the checkout experience is kind of like fun stuff, like how to customize some of the Verifone screens. So like you can have an updating cart display, things that like the customer will end up seeing. Receipts, like we make receipts really easy for you. And you can use custom ones. You can use the ones we give you. And then finally, at the end, we've got a testing doc and a checklist. And this checklist is meant to, again, like kind of re-scope and like make sure that you feel confident deploying this thing, because there are a lot of different parts. And at the end, it should all feel very cohesive. So we have these checkboxes, help you feel ready to deploy. And then one thing I'd like to also bring attention to before we get out of the docs, but we can take questions on docs too if you have them, is if you're like, okay, yeah, like I get it, I want to place an order. I've read the designing and integration page. We kind of cover like the basics of that here and point you back to like where you can actually get your hands on a device. And then some questions about that too. So yeah, basically no matter what you're doing, no matter what stage you're at, your questions should be sort of answered in the docs. Cool.
And that's the hope. But if there's something that seems to be missing as you look through things, or if you have any feedback on this, we really do take all of that to heart. So if there are things that you notice that we could be doing better or things that are unclear, we make updates to this pretty regularly. I mean, on an almost daily basis as we see things. So please let us know. Please let us know.
I'm gonna pass it back to you now.
Yeah, let me do a quick demo of what it looks like to order hardware, since we just talked about that. This is something I'm pretty excited about as well, if my excitement for other things wasn't enough. And let's find out where that window is. It's here. Cool. So in order to get hardware, what we've done is build a sort of e-commerce shop into the Stripe dashboard. And we did this based on a lot of feedback from folks around Stripe helping manage the device process. And the way that this works is you're able to just navigate to terminal in your Stripe dashboard. And when you do that, you're presented with a couple of options. We're not going to do sort of a full dashboard tour here. I'd recommend checking this out. But just to show you a couple of quick things, you can dive into a location and see the readers with that location. So this is that emoji labeled reader that I just created during the demo. If we go back though, we'll also see an option for hardware orders. And I'm in test mode here, so we're not going to actually ship me some readers. But if I click on shop, I'm presented with the ability to just make purchases. So it's just a standard flow. You can go in, buy whatever hardware you need. Of course, the BB Pause reader, the Verifone reader, and then any accessories that might also be interesting. In the Verifone reader's case, that comes with the reader, the connector cable, and the power cable. So if you just want to get started with this, you can just grab one of these. We'd also really recommend getting a test card. So that was the card that you saw me demo with earlier. I'll just kind of put it on the reader there. I think they look really awesome. They're really cool. And they're $5 here in the store, so feel free to grab one. These test cards are actually configured with some pre-configured decline codes. So there's a testing page in the docs where if you key in certain amounts with terminal, we'll provide you with a predictable decline code. So that's just a way for you to test, how your application handles certain types of payment failures that you might see in the field. So let's say I want to do what I just mentioned. I want to buy a Verifone reader. Let's also buy a test card. I can just do that from here. If you're interested in more, there's a link out to the docs here in addition to some of the technical specs of the device. But in my case, I know that this is pretty much what I want. I can just click checkout. And let's just go ahead and ship this to myself. We'll ship this to the Stripe office. plus our zip code, something like that. And then we'll just do this. And for me to just place a test mode order, I can just, go in with my 4242. You'll see that we calculate tax and shipping here and just pass that on to you. If you need to make changes, you can do that here. And we can just place an order. And we'll show you the status of that order right here in the dashboard. You can click into it, and if you ever need help with an order, just click that contact support button, and you'll be put in touch with someone who can help with whatever you need, whether that's canceling, refunding, anything like that. So yeah, I think hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Again, if you have any feedback on this, would love to hear that too. What I wanted to do now was just go back to our slides here and just make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So I don't know if we need the screen plugged in for this, but
yeah,
Chris,
you can kill the screen.
All right.
So first off, thank you for all the developers asking questions in the live stream. I think we're trying to answer them in real time, and we'll also go through some of the ones we've recently answered. I think we're already to about 50 questions, and so keep bringing them. We want to tackle them. I will say, Roshan just demoed the ordering the terminal and the cards and the dashboard. It is magic. So like I actually went ahead and did it, and I think 3 days later I got it in the mail, like my Stripe terminal. And like Roshan said, the best thing is the test card. So the presentation is incredibly fancy and it is see-through. So I don't know, for any devs out there, I think you'd like go ahead and get some boxes. So all right, here we go. So I think what we'll do is I have the questions that were already asked, and a lot of them I can tell that we've answered them, but why don't I'll pick out the ones and then again, keep asking them, and then we'll keep tackling them in line. So orders to me asked, is there a connect like offering for terminal? And we shared the link, right? So if you go to the terminal section in the side nav, there is a section on connect. And so definitely go check that out, especially if you're already a connect customer. BJ Welsk asked, can someone speak to if there's a quote standalone mode for the terminal program? And so that, the idea there of standalone is being able to use the reader by itself to accept payments. Yeah. I will say this, we are taking feedback. We are figuring out the future, but we don't have any immediate plans to talk about. So we can definitely follow up offline and hear what the use cases you'd like to do.
Just to add a little bit, yeah, I love that feature. I mean, I think it's really great. I'd love for us to be able to support it. We've definitely heard it a few times. So +1 on sort of taking that as feedback and making sure the teams are aware that that's been discussed.
Awesome. So then another, let's see, Eric Bodor has been asking some great questions. So have you considered integrating with a mobile reader device that can connect to the JavaScript API? For example, to integrate the BB chipper with our progressive web app, we had to use Cordova, which is not ideal, or Frat, which is not ideal.
Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So currently, as you're aware, the JavaScript SDK only supports the Verifone P400, which is an internet connected reader. In the future, we'll be adding additional readers that also kind of are connected over the internet. And we will support kind of mobile form factors. So you'll be able to use the JavaScript SDK with these readers in the future. Supporting Bluetooth readers like the BB chipper isn't on our near-term roadmap, but thanks for the feedback.
Yeah. I don't know if the additional detail is helpful, but my understanding of this is always that the JavaScript SDK would have to run and sort of deal with an underlying Bluetooth stack on any sort of number of web-enabled devices, right? Which makes the implementation of that kind of really sort of larger surface area.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So Blackbird 2690 asks two very good questions. So the first one is, I like when we get teed up with questions that we can answer quickly. So can we use the same reader for test and production versions of our iOS and Android app? For example, I received the test credit card with the reader. How can we differentiate between test and production versions?
I like it. The answer is yes. The same reader works for everything. The only difference is how you've provisioned the API keys for your reader. So if your backend is set up to use the test mode API keys, you'll be basically processing in test mode. And if it's set up to use live mode API keys, you'll be processing in live mode. So you could go ahead and develop with the reader and then deploy that out in store. I will mention a couple of caveats there. One is the test card only works in test mode, and you cannot use live cards in test mode. So if you try to use sort of a live card while still in test mode in your integration, that will throw an error, which is just a standard Stripe error that doesn't allow live cards in test mode.
So Roshan, Blackbird 2690, he also they followed up and said, could I order in bulk, say 400 or 500 readers? What would you say to that?
I would say please and yes. We're happy to facilitate those. If you want to reach out to us, you can email support-terminal@stripe.com, or just reach out to, I think I saw a couple of emails dropped in the chat there, and we'll just make sure it gets to the right place. But yeah, we've definitely had folks who've requested bulk orders. I'm happy to facilitate that, and make that easy for you.
Carl Weiss asked if I wanted to know if you could touch on some of the best practices around associating readers with Connect accounts, and specifically, how could that work with locations?
Yeah, sure, I can talk about that a bit. Terminal is designed to work kind of seamlessly with Connect. And the main thing that kind of affects your terminal and Connect integration is your charging style. So whether you use destination charging or direct charging, and we have docs on this. But the TLDR is that basically keep in mind your charging type, and that will kind of affect how you both make payments with terminal and also how you utilize locations to segment your readers. I'm happy to dig into that more.
I think a related follow-up question, Ben, is Eric Bodor is asking, why can we not name BBOS chippers during registration like you can a Verifone P400? And then also kind of what would you suggest in terms of best practices there with Bluetooth?
Yeah, totally. So I guess that, as you all are aware, the readers are different and they have different kind of connection and discovery styles. So for Bluetooth readers, you'll have to kind of implement a kind of discovery and pairing flow for the readers. And this is kind of outside of the kind of locations that you use to segment and filter your Verifone readers. So for these Bluetooth readers, if you happen to be using the iOS SDK, we recommend that you use the Bluetooth proximity feature if you have like a lot of readers next to your user. This will help them in your app discover only the closest reader to them. And we found this works pretty well and people are pretty happy with it. And we're looking into adding it to our Android SDK as well. And in addition to that, we'll also look into kind of allowing you to label these BBPOS readers in the future.
Yeah, one thing that's probably worth calling out there is with the BBPOS readers, the registration is implicit, right? There's not an explicit registration step like what we saw here. So.
Yeah, exactly. So in order to connect to these internet connector readers, you first have to associate them with your Stripe account so that your application can discover them over the internet. For BBPOS readers, which are Bluetooth connected, you can just discover them via Bluetooth. So there's no need for this registration step.
Great. So Kevin Byers, Eric Bodor, a bunch of other developers asking collectively, when is tipping coming? And also, what's the deal with signing for transactions? So what do you say?
Good questions. Around signature, we've actually seen the card brands move away from signature as a requirement, especially in the United States, and especially as, there are more EMV or chip cards out there. So we don't support signature capture today, and we've talked with the card brands about this and I think they're pretty comfortable with that approach. So we don't sort of see the need for that anymore, just given the way that the credit card and debit card industry is evolving. Sorry, what was the first part of that question? Tipping, yeah. Definitely something we're looking at. I believe are working in private beta with some users on tipping. If you are interested in that, let us know, drop us a line, and we'll get you added to the right things and let you know when it's available. But we've definitely had a lot of requests for that and want to make sure that we can support it sort of as a first class integration with the Verifone reader. If you're using the BBPOS reader or even with the Verifone reader, you can also just design your own tipping flow if you'd like. You can sort of have a step that requests or prompts for a tip and then collect the payment afterwards. And so we've seen some folks kind of build that themselves. That's something you can do today, but we obviously do want to support sort of a first class experience on the device that enables the user to push a button and then sort of add 10%. So that's something that we're kind of putting through the product development process and are excited to support.
So I think there's a lot of questions that we've answered, but I want to kind of summarize them as Wi-Fi questions, connectivity, like auto connectivity questions. What would you say to a new terminal, someone who just goes ahead on the dashboard and purchases terminals? What should they know about Wi-Fi out of the box, and how would you tell someone with a fleet of devices about auto connect?
Sure. So Wi-Fi is currently a feature that's in private beta. So if you're interested, please email us in the email shared in the chat, and we can make sure that you get it into the feature. And kind of going forward, we're going to be out of beta soon, and after that, all users will be able to use Wi-Fi out of the box. So that's kind of what you can expect, I think.
And that's for Verifone.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. So the Verifone readers are will be Wi-Fi enabled. That's one of those examples where we can provision that with a remote software update. So even if you have a Verifone reader already, we'll just add Wi-Fi support to it when we've ironed out some of the kinks in the process that we're working through during the private beta. But again, yeah, if you're interested, let us know. I saw a couple of questions around network connectivity. Maybe the high-level way of explaining this is that the Verifone reader has to be connected to the internet. When you discover readers from your application, you're actually making a server-side call to Stripe and grabbing the reader data from your Stripe account after that reader's been registered. However, the connection between your point of sale and the reader, so this is for things like payment or actually when you call connect reader in the SDK, that's all done over the local network. And so there is a bit of a divide there in terms of the things that take place that are just sort of purely server-side from the reader to Stripe. And that's sort of where that internet connection is required. And then there's a sort of separate piece of the puzzle where the client application and your JavaScript integration is talking over the local area network to the reader. So there's sort of both of those things required. We do go into a little more detail on this in the docs, but long story short, as long as those devices are typically, if they're on the same subnet and same LAN can communicate with each other, that'll facilitate that.
A few questions. Thanks, Roshan and Ben and Lucy. A few questions around, hey, this example is great. You're showing a desktop, permanent setup for a reader. What about the use case where the point of sale is actually mobile? Like you can actually move around, say like in a tech store where you can kind of pay with one of the tellers in motion. What would you say to a company that's trying to figure out that use case?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to do it actually. So the sort of pure mobile solution that we're offering is with the iOS or Android SDK and the BB reader. I don't know if this is super visible, but you can kind of see at the center here.
Do you want to bring it up to the camera?
Yeah, we could maybe zoom in or something, or I could.
No worries.
Yeah, and so that's our mobile reader. It's a pretty small sort of handheld device. It comes with a lanyard, and it pairs over Bluetooth. And so this is what we were talking about earlier around the Bluetooth reader. You can actually also run a JavaScript app on a device that floats around the store. So for example, we've seen some users build a JavaScript-based integration and then run that on an iPad. And then when it's time to check out or pay in store, they just walk the customer over to where the Verifone reader is and then just have them present their card. So you can sort of think of a couple of different experiences around that. But if you're looking for something purely mobile, we recommend the BB reader along with one of our mobile SDKs.
Thanks, Roshan. One trend I'm seeing in the questions is kind of related to that use case is the idea of a shopper comes in, kind of swipes or taps their card, is locked in to then make some purchasing decisions, and at the end you want the bill to come without the shopper requiring to swipe again. So how would that work? Kind of pre-qualifying for purchases.
Pre-qualifying, interesting.
I shouldn't have said pre-qualifying. I should have said something around being able to reuse the card without swiping a second time.
Got it. Yeah. So that's the reusable card that we showed. So basically, you're able to save the card details. One thing we also support here is that you can both capture the customer's payment and then save those payment details to be used later, all within one transaction. I think during the beta, that was slightly different. We had it where you had to independently save the card details. We can now all support that all within the initial transaction. So you can just, collect payment, like a $50 one-time payment, and then save that card without making the customer re-enter their card. So that's kind of a new thing that we've done between beta and GA based on some feedback. Yeah, the reusable card is the easiest way to save those card details. If you wanted to just read the card, as a customer identifier, you could do that too. And we've seen some folks use the card fingerprint as a way to kind of identify a customer based on the card. Maybe kind of related to this, we also offer sort of an email receipt flow that sort of built out of the box. So there's a Stripe generated email receipt for in-store payments that you can choose to send your customers. If you prefer to make your own, we offer you the ability to sort of parse the parameters in the payment response and take the relevant bits that are required to make an email receipt for an EMV card and generate your own receipt. We have a doc on receipts, so if you're interested in kind of designing your own thing there, feel free to take a look and see what you want to do.
Great. So Sil Marlios asks, and actually a few devs at larger companies are asking with regards to PCI compliance. What do we need to do on our end with our devs to make sure we're covering all our bases? Specifically, is this like handled by us, or is this taken care of on the Stripe side? And so there's probably a large answer to that. But what would you tell an existing Stripe customer that wants to do terminal what they should know about PCI compliance?
Great question. The first thing I would say is we have a Stripe guide called A Guide to PCI Compliance. And I refer to that all the time when I have questions about PCI. It's really great. So hopefully we can find a link to drop in the chat here. But it does include kind of the surface area of what PCI is, what the requirements are, kind of like who should care about this, which is pretty much everyone who's handling card data, and what it means for terminal. So we've updated that to reflect some of the new content that's relevant for terminal. Long story short, the way terminal is built is that your point of sale application only ever receives a token. So we don't return raw credit card data. We don't send you a full card number. And that has the benefit of sort of decreasing the scope of your compliance. Any merchant that handles card data is required to attest to PCI compliance or be able to attest to it, I should say. But we may try to de-scope that for you. And so I'd recommend checking out the guide for some more specifics. But long story short, if you need documentation to attest PCI compliance, you're welcome to reach out to us. There's a compliance section in your Stripe dashboard and a button that will appear once you've processed 20 live mode terminal transactions. That'll allow you to request an SAQC document to attest validation for in-person payments. We're happy to walk through that process with you, which we'll do, and also kind of answer any questions that you have once you get in touch that way.
Great, thank you. So what would we say to a Canadian like Ryan Hovey, who's feeling left out, just wants to know when can they get terminals? What do we say to these non-US folks that are wanting to get their hands on terminals?
I will say we're working as fast as we can. So definitely support for other countries is a very high priority on our roadmap. Now that we've sort of gone through the GA process with the United States, we're continuing to focus on expansion internationally. We are focusing on a couple of private betas, including in Canada, that are hopefully launching this year. A little more to come on that, but if you are interested, again, please get in touch through any one of the emails that we've probably shared by now, and we'll make sure we add you to those beta lists. We want to make sure we have sort of a good private beta cohort in those countries, and Canada is something we're targeting, for hopefully this year.
Lucy, here's a question for you. Kent Pimentel asks, can you highlight the differences between the BBPOS and the Verifone?
Sure. I guess it depends on what you're trying to do and what kind of like user experience you want to create or checkout experience. One way that we summed this up at one point was that if you want the like a user facing screen, like during checkout, for sure use the Verifone, like where you control the screen. If you're using the BBPOS, it doesn't have a screen, so your app will have to do all of that. Like if you want to update the cart details as you go, that's on you. But if you want to use that on the Verifone, like we help you do that. If you want to customize your splash screen with the BBPOS, like you would be doing that like store by store in your own app. If you want to do that with the Verifone, it's a little easier. But the cool thing about the BBPOS is like it's very mobile. It's kind of cool. You can like tape it to the back of your phone or like hang it on a lanyard. So if you're doing anything like out in the field or like you're a Connect platform and you have a bunch of people who go to, I don't know, like craft fairs or something, it's super easy for stuff like that.
Great.
Seeing any big key distinguishers?
Yeah, no, I think
that's helpful. Let me skip ahead. We got a ton of questions. Thank you, Lucy. Our friend Blackbird 2690 is back again with a question we haven't touched on. Can you speak a little bit on error handling? So sometimes we get errors based on what the issue is. Like for example, the Bluetooth might not be working, or the tap experience, or the card is worn out. Like a lot of our customers, it can't be read. How would we handle these type of errors with terminal?
Yeah, for sure. So we have pretty good documentation on this, and also our headers for the iOS and Android native SDKs include kind of an errors file, which will give you kind of all the different cases that you'll handle. For the common cases, things like a card read failing, the SDK gives you good kind of like delegate methods that you can use to display that information to your customer in your application. Definitely ping us though if you have any questions about handling any of these specific error cases.
Yeah, and to the point about the card wearing out option, we don't support keyed entry or manual entry today. But what I will say is that typically there's a fallback process with these types of transactions where if the chip read fails a certain number of times, you're allowed to accept a swipe, and that's like a swipe fallback for a chip card. We document the specifics around kind of how many reads should fail before you can swipe. That's all in the docs, but we do support technical fallback for EMV transactions, which is part of the spec as far as accepting chip or EMV cards. So in terms of that, we've seen pretty good uptake as far as sort of that standard process.
Also, I'm not sure if that's in the docs or in the, it might be in the support site.
It might be in the FAQ. Okay, yeah, we can make sure to find that if people are interested.
Where would someone go for the FAQ, not the docs?
So I think it's support.stripe.com. And if you search for terminal, you'll find sort of a variety of sort of common questions that we heard both during the beta and also from folks who are writing in, just kind of regularly with questions about the product. Yeah, if you haven't seen support.stripe, it's a pretty cool reference. It's just really focused in the Q&A format. So that might be a good place to check. Is that right, Lucy?
Yeah, support.stripe.com. And also if you just like Google your questions, these questions tend to bubble up. So that's kind of the point of this site.
We're already talking back channel about we have a lot of new FAQ questions. So thank you everyone for throwing it at us. We have opportunity for a couple more questions and we'll wrap up. And so John Lund and Rachel Beckstead asks similar questions around if you save a card and file, do you need to capture any opt-in for authorization if we want to use it again? And John Lund is similar, but it's different. It's when you save a card, do follow-on payments from it get charged as a card not present, which would imply higher processing fees, or would it be considered also card present for future transactions?
Yeah, so to the first question, our guidance here is that you need to comply with sort of the regulations and compliance requirements in your region when it comes to saving those card details. For the second question, it is card not present. So yeah, if you saved a card and want to charge it later and it's done so in a card not present scenario, we will charge you card not present rates based on your Stripe rates. So.
Great. And then let's see what else we have. Jamie Thornton, is there any way to keep the BBPOS connected to iOS longer than a few minutes? Right now, we're having to reconnect the BBPOS almost every other transaction.
Yeah, so by default, this shouldn't be necessary. The BBPOS is meant to stay connected to your app kind of for as long as it is powered on. If you're having issues with this, please send us an email to support-terminal@stripe.com, and we can help you troubleshoot the issue. If you can send us kind of steps to reproduce and your logs, that'd be super helpful. And also maybe also try out the example app and see if you run into the same behavior.
Great. So we have time for 2 more questions. And so the best username I've seen so far is Jakey asked, I know you have a reader setup and connection steps. Will you be creating best practices troubleshooting guide? I think that's kind of a follow-up from the support site, but what would you say to, actually, particularly it's also for stores setting up terminals, like on behalf of a larger company. What would you say for best practices in troubleshooting for setting up the readers?
Yeah, maybe you could let Lucy talk to this. That's definitely sort of the next set of things we want to put in the docs. We actually spent some time just last week thinking about like what should we try to get out in H2, and yeah, that's definitely top of mind for us. Both the supportability in terms of like here's how we recommend you deploy, but also in terms of how to debug when things go wrong. Yeah, high priority for us.
Yeah, nothing really to add there except like we understand that the person setting up the reader in the store might be a different person from the person integrating in the first place, and so we really want to support the former person in that too.
Great. So the final question is from Lavesh Kataria. Will there be any plans to provide support for React Native on iOS and Android both? As of now, there's a few open source unofficial libraries.
Yep. So we don't have current plans to officially support React Native, but for now, we recommend using that React Native library that you linked to, the unofficial one. And we will work with these people to kind of make sure that they're kind of in line with our APIs.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Terminal team. This was a treat. I think we've answered well over 100 questions. So this was also for anyone that jumped halfway in, scroll back through the comments. We answered and provided URLs and links to many of the questions we also answered on screen. Go to Stripe, dashboard.stripe.com. There's a navigation for terminal. You can order terminals or just try out the simulator for yourself. And then lastly, please subscribe to the Stripe developers channel. We're going to have another one of these next month, focused on like just general office hours. And thanks for building on the Stripe platform. We really appreciate all the developers and partners that are interested and excited for terminal. So, all right, until next time, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.